start with Mr. Genuis for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hartle, for your testimony, and more importantly, thank you for your courage in coming forward and shedding light on these issues. I know there are a lot of people who see problems in government or things that shouldn't be happening, but most of them don't proactively share the concerns that they have. So thank you for doing that. You've identified the fact that this joint venture involving Canadian Healthcare Agency only existed to take advantage of the Indigenous procurement rules. It wasn't a sort of organically emergent Indigenous company. It was created for the purpose of taking advantage of the rules that exist and providing maximal, in fact, complete advantage to non-Indigenous owners of Canadian Healthcare Agency. Is that correct?
That's correct. The owner of CHCA, Miss Humana, promised the Indigenous company, a lady named Pearl Chilton, that she would make lots of money, but then never had her do nothing. Done the proposal herself and made up employees for Miss Chilton's company, and made sure that she ran everything, didn't discuss any of the business of the joint venture at all with Miss Chilton. And Miss Chilton was left with a large GST tax bill that was incurred because of the way that they were submitted to the Canada Revenue Agency.
So it sounds like this relationship was not only fraudulent vis-a-vis the government, but it was exploitive vis-a-vis the person who was supposed to be the Indigenous partner.
That's correct.
Okay. I think that's important. I want to really zero in, though, on the response of the government when you brought these issues forward. We would hope maybe that as soon as someone would bring these issues to light, there would be a real sounding of the alarm internally and a desire to remedy the situation.
The players on the government side was FNEB, who was a branch, which was a branch of Health Canada at that time, PSPC, and well, it was actually INAC at that time. So, and I was within the INAC stream there, and so I wrote my report, which I distributed prior to this meeting. And then we held several meetings where we had not only those players, but we also had a representative from the Department of Justice who was a lawyer serving INAC at that time, and I presented the evidence which was substantial to indicate there was fraud. And my recommendation was that that it be given to the RCMP to investigate, but they didn't want any trouble, so they didn't do it.
If you can tell us more about that a little bit, you've recommended that this be referred to the RCMP because you thought criminal activity, in fact, was involved, and they didn't want any trouble.
Well, yeah, I thought it was fraud because you can't invent employees for a company, and then submit that in your bid proposal to win the contract, because the number of employees in the Indigenous company went towards points to win the contract. So it was to me, that's definitely fraud, and all the documentation was there to prove that, and besides additional.
But you also said something about motivation, them not wanting any trouble. So what kinds of comments did they make in terms of explaining why they didn't refer this to the RCMP?
I can't remember the exact comments, but because in a large meeting, you have your input, but you don't necessarily. And I was only there as an external auditor presenting facts to.
But there were lots of people there.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, there was.
Okay.
As I said, there was representatives, from PSPC, FNEB, and INAC.
Right. Okay.
And the DOG lawyer was there also.
Right. So fast forward today, this company is still getting government contracts. They've been taken off the Indigenous business list, but they are still eligible for getting government contracts. And the only people fired following this affair were Round Point Consulting. Maybe take us forward to the fact that they're still getting contracts, but Round Point Consulting has been fired by the government.
Well, in fact, the INAC invented a program so that they could give contracts to CHCA. So that's how they were able to get contracts. And
what do you mean they invented a program?
Well, I'm sorry, designed.
But for the purposes of giving contracts to this company.
To this entity.
So what's the relationship between this company and the government of Canada?
I have no idea.
Okay. If you could just tell us the situation about Round Point getting their contract pulled meantime.
Oh, yes. Well,
I'm sorry to, Mr. Hartle. Mr. Hartle, I'm afraid I have to interrupt. It is our time, but perhaps we can get to it in the next round with Mr. Genuis, or he can provide that to us in writing. We'll go over to Mrs. Atwin, please, now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hartle, for being with us today. Have you ever been a permanent or part-time employee of Indigenous Services Canada?
No, I have not.
So the recent Globe and Mail article mentions that you worked under contract with the government. Yes. But why does your LinkedIn profile indicate that you've been employed at Indigenous Services since 2016, with no mention of Round Point Consulting?
Oh, no, I think I addressed that in my remarks, which you will get a copy of. But definitely, in fact, the thing is, I started in November 2016 as a subcontractor to Altus Professional Services, who held the contract to supply independent third-party auditors for the program or for the strategy.
Okay.
And then Altus's contract ended in March 31st, 2021, and then Round Point put its bid in that fall and won the contract. And I started again in the 1st of April 2022.
Okay.
But as an employee of Round Point Consulting.
Okay, thank you. I've just got such a short period of time here. Did you have any conflict of interest screens in place while you were a contractor for Indigenous Services Canada?
What kind of conflict of interest?
So are you aware of any conflict of interest screens or policies in place for employees at Indigenous Services Canada while you were a contractor for them? Was there a conversation about conflict of interest?
I would not be covered by conflict of interest if I'm a subcontractor.
Okay. And so can you then, I think you mentioned this, but can you confirm if you have been an employee of Round Point Consulting?
Yep.
Okay. And has Round Point Consulting ever been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory?
Yes, Round Point Consulting.
Do you know when that occurred?
Maybe 2020, 2021. They've been a member of the IBD for quite some time.
So would that have been during the time that you were contracted to perform eligibility audits?
I beg your pardon?
Would that have been during the time frame that you were contracted to perform the eligibility audits?
Yes.
Do you believe that an auditor contracted to review applications for the Indigenous Business Directory is well placed to determine if their own business should be listed?
Well, in 2020 and 2021, we did not audit. We didn't have anything to do with the IBD.
Okay.
So the IBD was, I forget the exact date, but it was formerly run by Industry Canada. So Industry Canada would register the businesses, but then Industry Canada decided that they no longer wanted to do that function. They said it was too expensive. So then IBD decided to design their own business directory, So in that period of time,
The Indigenous Business Directory decided to design its own business directory? Is that what you just said?
Well, yeah, because the business directory before was being run by Industry Canada and no longer wanted to do it, so it give it back to ISC to design its own.
So ISC, okay. Okay. While you were doing this work, how many audits did you complete, roughly?
Oh, maybe 100 a year.
100 a year, okay. Do you happen to know what the non-compliance rate would be? And could you share that with us?
Fairly low. I don't think it would exceed. It definitely wouldn't exceed 10%. May even be lower than that.
Okay. And I'll just jump now quickly to the Canadian Healthcare Agency piece as well. So when were you made aware of concerns around CHCA?
Well, I'd done the audit, So
And what was the
I
time?
was tasked with doing the audit, the post-award audit on them.
Do you know the date though, just so I can?
2017.
Okay. And when did you report this alleged issue to PSPC?
It was probably a month or two. We had difficulty with the company because they wouldn't supply the information. They kept asking for deferrals to have the audit completed. So I don't have the exact date, and I was looking for it. I don't have the date on my report either. So, but it was sometime during 2017.
Okay. And as an auditor, what do you look for when verifying Indigenous identity? Is that something that you look into?
Oh, okay. I don't know if you got a copy of, and I'll just briefly go over that if they give me time to do this. But
Actually, I've only got about 45 seconds, so maybe I'll just end with this one. So, can I just ask?
There are a whole list of things that we look at.
Sure.
Okay,
And if you've provided that to us, that's fantastic. I'll look
and
into
I
that.
can
But I've just got
provide
about
that to
30
you.
seconds, Mr. Hartle. So what is your response to the minister's announcement yesterday that she's pursuing an external audit of the Indigenous Business Directory?
Well, that was being done, and she fired the person doing it. So it seems to be a rather hypocritical response to a problem that they created themselves.
Okay. Thank you. All from
Thanks,
me, Mr.
Mrs.
Chair.
Atwin. Mrs. Vignola, welcome back.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hartle, for being with us today. Could you please put in your earpiece?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, or can you hear the interpretation clearly? There's a volume button on the machine in front of you, the little console in front of you. Thank you. The clerk will help.
We'll start at the beginning.
English channel. This is the interpretation English channel for volume purposes. English channel interpretation.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. You talked earlier about the letter of December 5th and the fact that you found a Canadian Healthcare Agency was doing fraudulent activity. Is that what you were saying? That it was that company that was the problem?
Yes, that company was the problem.
OK. Et quelle preuve démontre une situation?
What evidence do you have of this fraud? You talked earlier about the other company that had employees that were not part of that company, that there was a GST amount because of this declaration, even though these employees were not part of that company, they had never seen the money. Are there other details that you could give the committee quickly on that topic?
Well, the evidence is substantial, and it's in my report. All the evidence. I don't have the evidence, but I have the evidence catalog, and so if you look at my audit report, and on the page on exhibits, okay. So I had Appendix A, A1, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Each with substantial documents in them.
Merci beaucoup. Ce rapport-là a été soumis au comité.
Thank you very much. And that report, you submitted it to committee. That's to the committee. That's right?
That's right.
Parfait.
Perfect. Now, in the distribution of contract procedure, are there any gaps that would open the doors to this kind of fraudulent situation, the one kind that you've raised today?
Well, if you follow the procedure, there would be no gaps. Okay, so I think there's also a copy of the procedures in the document package. So we also had standards. So each audit that was performed had to follow these standards, and I think I give you in the package a copy of the standards that we used for the audit. So.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So everything is in the document you submitted to us. Perfect. Now, you're telling us that if the procedures are followed, then there should not be any problems. There should be no gaps. However, it looks like there are. In that case, should we be monitoring what's happening during the contract itself instead of waiting for an audit at the end?
No, the process is two-stage. Okay, you in the large contracts you have to have a pre-award audit completed in order to be awarded the audit or the contract, and then on the large contracts there's always a post-award audit, and if you follow the procedures for the post-award audits, you will uncover when the criterion of Indigenous content is not being met. But as you can see, if you don't actually perform the audit, you won't know whether or not they had adhered to the criterion of Indigenous content. So there's no real gaps. You know, the audits were in place to ensure that the program was being used properly.
OK. Mais les audits sont faits.
But these audits are conducted afterwards. They're post-award audits. And my question was really during the duration of the contract to make sure the Indigenous business is really getting what it is owed. Should there be audits conducted during the period of the contract, also not just before or after, but throughout the process?
The post-award audit is not really post-award. It's conducted when there's about 70% of the work completed. You have to be able to complete some of the work to see if they're actually following what they said they were going to follow. You can't presume that a company will or will not meet the criterion before the actual contract is completed.
Le simple fait de
Now, the simple fact of removing a business from the directory, is it enough of a consequence for a business that did not respect the Indigenous procurement process or that pretended to be an Indigenous company when it is not? Is it enough to simply remove them from the directory?
I think that this was a discussion. I mean, it was brought to the department's attention, and also to the PSPC. That this was going on. And the PSPC defaulted the contract, but took no other action on the fraud part of it. They just elected. So that's a government initiative that you have to address with Procurement Canada, and because ISC doesn't have anything to do with the contract other than to recommend that the company meets the criteria for an Indigenous business.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Blaney, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hartle, for being here with us today. I appreciated your testimony, and I also read the article very carefully this morning. In your testimony, I think you said, and I just want to clarify this, that there is no governing act around this component, and we've definitely heard that from other sources as well. So I guess I just want a little bit of clarity. You said during your interview that the auditors could not contact the businesses but had to give questions to the government, and there was a whole, sounds quite a complex process. I'm just wondering, is there any connection between that process and the fact that there is no governing act?
No, there's no governing act, but there is a cabinet issued policy that was mandated to be followed, and they have published guidelines on that policy. So between the various audits that I did and whenever Miss Sultan became in charge of the program, the previous senior program managers knew the program inside out, and they were empathetic to the Indigenous business, and they did a very good job, and they respected what was written in the contract is the external auditor would do an independent audit and give them the results of the audit. When Miss Sultan took over, she decided that she was going to dictate not only the process, but also she changed the policy unilaterally, I guess, because nobody's taken possession of the fact that the policy was changed and then no longer did what they were supposed to do under the policy guidelines.
So what added complexity was there because you had such a long process to go through since you couldn't talk to the business directly?
You were dealing with I don't like to use the word junior staff because it's condescending, but you were dealing with people that didn't have any knowledge of the program, didn't have any knowledge in dealing with outside clients, and didn't know what questions to ask, didn't know what documents to ask for. So it was like a constant hand-holding. That you instead of being able to smoothly carry out the audits as they had been done previously, we also had a productivity standard that we had to meet, which stated that if there was no other cause, then you had to deliver the report within 10 working days. So that the process worked very smoothly, and this got disrupted because she insisted that the junior staff do all this work, and the junior staff they were very nice people and tried to help them as much as they could, but because they didn't understand the program, they didn't know what to ask or how to ask it or you're not supposed to go fishing for anything. You, as an auditor, you're supposed to know what documents are available for you to examine. You don't ask a company to send every document they have. It's a very targeted experience. And they didn't comprehend that because they weren't auditors.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So you talked about the issue of round point consulting, and I thought it was very interesting, and I've heard this from Indigenous communities as well, is if they fight the fight and they have the money to hire the lawyers, they're absolutely going to win, but they often don't have the resources to hire the lawyer. So I'm just wondering if I get a little clarity. So is there no other venue that they can go to besides a judicial process? Is there any other mechanism for this kind of business to gather clarity, to get information, and to have a little bit of advocacy? Or is the judicial pathway the only pathway?
Well, because you're dealing with a contract, a written contract, and you decide that you're going to terminate the contract, for convenience. Now, the contract does state you can do it for convenience, but so judicial review is the only legitimate path to pursue, which means that you're showing that the government did wrong, and I'm positive that Round Point would have won its case.
And okay, I'm going to come back to that later. So I'm interested. You talked about mandatory audits being a part of the contract, and that you saw ISC not follow through with those mandatory steps. Are you specifically talking about one business, or is it a broader scope that you're reflecting on?
No, after July 2023, they had no capability to carry out any audits. So all of the mandated audits that are in the guidelines were being circumvented because they had no external auditors. You know, like if you wish, you can read the guidelines. So, you know, it states clearly that you must have an external auditor. When the program was first started, the government already had a branch that would supply the external auditors, so they used them. That's Canada Auditing and Consulting, but then the government disbanded that branch, so they had to find private sector external auditors.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Before we start our second round, Mr. Hartle, you've referred to some reports. I think perhaps you sent them to a different committee, but we haven't. You have to send them to each committee individually. So if you could forward those to our clerk, we'll follow up with you after this for the proper email. We'll now go to Mrs.
We have them all here.
You can pass them over to the clerk when you're done today.
Okay.
We'll go to Mrs. Block for 5, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our committee, Mr. Hartle. In follow-up to Ms. Atwin's questions, you mentioned that there was a whole list or criterion that was used in order to verify the indigeneity of a business. Would you be willing to share that list with committee in writing?
Yeah, I do have that here. I was just looking it up. Besides the I have that document, and we also would have read all the case law, notably Powley and Daniels, and we also were guided by Section 35 of the Constitution.
Thank you very much. And I would just ask that if you have that document, if you could submit it to the committee in writing, that would save you and I both a bit of time here.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
I will do that. In fact, I have it right
Thank
here.
you. Great. So I believe you may have answered this question as well. Who did you raise your concerns about PSIB and the ongoing abuses with?
Well, when I first started, the senior program manager was a lady named Melanie Reed, and Melanie is Indigenous, and she was concerned that the program ran smoothly. So she would hold meetings and take suggestions as to what could be done, including our audit manual, and I wrote some stuff on joint ventures, contractual joint ventures, with some recommendations.
If I may, what was her title?
At that time, she was senior program manager.
Okay, thank you.
Presently, she's a director in ISC.
Okay, thank you. In the Globe and Mail story, Minister Hadju is quoted as saying, and I quote, "I was just made aware of these deeply troubling allegations, and I am extremely concerned." Yet the allegations around this nursing company, CHAC, were published already in October in the Globe and Mail, and further issues with the PSIB have been brought to light over the inability to verify the indigeneity of businesses. However, the minister appears to have been unaware of these issues until this past Sunday, according to her statement. Does this seem realistic to you, that the minister was completely blind to this massive aspect of her portfolio?
Not really.
Not really? I think my next question would be, do you believe that these types of concerns would have ever made their way to the offices of at least the deputy minister, if not the minister?
Well, I was speaking about what went on in 2017, 18, and 19. Any problems with the program, the senior program manager would have discussed it with the ADM. She had a path to discuss it with the ADM. And once you discuss it with the ADM, the minister is always notified as to that there is a problem. I mean, that's standard practice.
Thank you very much. I guess my final question for you, if I have enough time left, would be that yesterday in your testimony to the INAN committee, you were asked a question about who made the decision to fire Round Point. And it would have appeared that when Ms. Sultan was trying to answer the question, the minister intervened. Can you confirm for us who it was that made the decision to fire Round Point? Do you in fact know?
Well, okay, she said, Ms. Sultan said, that it was a joint decision with the contract authority. Well, I just a minute, I get my notes here because I watched that and I was going to address it, but I ran out of time. This is totally false, okay? The contract authority, a lady named Karen Metzer, is designated senior procurement officer. And her authority only pertains to administrative matters, such as writing the contract, ensuring the contractor adheres to the security provisions, and processing the invoices for work completed. That's all her authority. So any decision on policy matters rests solely with the Director General. So she made the decision. And
Thanks, Mr. Hurdle. That's our time. We have a strict schedule we got to keep to. Mr. Kuzmierczak, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hardle, for your appearance here at committee here today. So wanted to ask you a few questions. As of November of 2024, there are 2,945 businesses listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. Of those 3,000, let's say, businesses, 111 are Indigenous businesses are joint ventures, which represents about 3% of the total. And in 2022, when ISC did a review of the Indigenous Business Directory, they delisted or removed 1,100 businesses. So about 25% of the total were removed. Can you comment on this step that was taken? Any thoughts on that?
I have a couple of notes on businesses being removed from the ID. From 2017,
Just really quickly, sir.
Yeah, so each year there was business dropped and added. So the number always fell somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 businesses each year. New ones being added, some of them being dropped. And it was explained that they would be dropped for various reasons. Like the business wouldn't respond, maybe went out of business.
But 1,000 had been removed from the last review. Is that significant? That number, in your opinion?
No, because you know, there was years that easily get 500. You know, so going to 1,000 is not to me significant. And don't forget that there was a spike when the 5% target was introduced. Okay, so the government actively tried to get businesses to register in the IBD in order to meet the 5% target, and then they found that they were a little bit over exuberant, and that some of these people shouldn't have been included, so they took them out. So
I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Mr. Hardle, and I just for the interest of time, I do have another question for you. Are you familiar with the new Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance, or OSIC, that was established by this government? It actually expands what is the grounds for which a business can be made ineligible or suspended. It broadens the number of violations that can be brought forward and the penalties that can be doled out. Are you aware of the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance that was introduced?
So I'm aware that the office was introduced, but I didn't look at the details. It was on my to-do list.
Now, this office was not around when you were doing audits, as I understand it, and so the tools that we've introduced to strengthen integrity and compliance, and also the penalties that can be provided, was not available when you were doing your audits. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
That's correct. Oh, okay.
And I think that was the major criticism that was there from the previous Harper government, was that the integrity regime only had at that point a nuclear button. It could only react only if a company was charged or convicted of a crime, for example. Then the integrity regime kicked in. Whereas now there is much more nuanced, broader scope of violations that can be addressed, and many more tools for the integrity regime. Is that a fair assessment?
Well,
that things have improved right now?
Not really. I mean, if you would proceed with fraud investigations, then it would have kicked in. So right now you're perhaps in the same boat. You know, if nobody moves on the result of the audit, how can it do its work? So,
okay.
But the added tools are welcome.
And then just to clarify, you mentioned that you had done 100 audits per year. Are those 100 audits of federal programs?
Of the PSIP program, and we also, don't forget, we once the ISC introduced the IBD as their own, we done desk audits for them on the registrants and on people who were already registered to ensure that they had maintained eligibility.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Quickly, Mr. Hartle.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, Mr. Hartle, I want to come back to the previous question regarding consequences. Were they sufficient, that is, for businesses that claim to be Indigenous when they weren't? You said no. In your humble opinion, what would be an appropriate sanction that could be applied to a business, a non-Indigenous one, that claimed to be Indigenous or that took advantage of an Indigenous business?
Okay, if your fraud investigation by the outside authority, like the RCMP, convicts them or manages to find them guilty or gather enough evidence, then they should be barred from bidding on federal government contracts.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now, in the document you brought to us regarding Canada Healthcare Agency, what are the gaps in the procedure that open the doors to what we saw in the abusive process that you highlighted in your report?
In the pre-award audit, they didn't verify the claims by the bidder. Okay, when we started doing the post-award audit, then we discovered that those documents were fraudulent. Okay, so the gap is that maybe the pre-award audit was not extensive enough or was not conducted thoroughly enough.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Blaney, please. 2.5.
Well, thank you, Chair. You know, I just have one follow-up question. You talked about CHCA and some of their practices, and specifically around Pearl Chilton, who was part of the joint venture. And you mentioned that she was left with a large tax bill because of a serious misrepresentation. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that looked like, and again, maybe touch on if Pearl Chilton had any capacity besides the judicial process to advocate for herself.
Okay. No, I wasn't talking about Ms. Chilton when I was talking about the judicial process. Ms. Chilton had avenues to pursue legally, that is, and I think she did. She had an Aboriginal lawyer represent her, and there was some litigation.
No, you didn't. I understand that you didn't mention it, but what I'm trying to understand is for Indigenous people who are part of this process, if something goes poorly, what are the steps that they have to self-advocate? Is it only through the judicial process? As far as you're speaking right now, it seems like the only way they can address it is by getting a lawyer.
Ms. Chilton asked INAC for help. INAC didn't help her. So her advocacy in that manner was out of the question. So all that remains for her at that point was the legal process.
Thank you. I'm done. That's my question.
Thanks. Mr. Genuis for 5, and then finish with Mr. Sousa for 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. And frankly, Mr. Hartle, this whole situation is just disgusting. You have a department in government that is supposed to be there to support Indigenous peoples. You have a Prime Minister who said that this is the most important relationship, and then you have really what we've been talking about throughout this whole scandal, which is elite, well-connected, non-Indigenous insiders taking advantage of the program to try to enrich themselves, and Indigenous peoples being left at a severe disadvantage as a result, and the government, the department, not having their back, only trying to preserve the optics of the program. To review your testimony, you identified the fact that there was a problem with the Canadian Healthcare Agency. The minister was likely informed. You wanted to refer this issue to the RCMP. You were blocked in doing so. They subsequently changed the rules to make the auditing process more difficult, and then they fired your auditing company. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. You wanted to follow up on your reaction to Ms. Salton's testimony yesterday.
I think I've covered quite a bit of that. You know, that one was stating that there was a joint decision when it was a unilateral decision by Ms. Sultan, and then there was a question about the work, and she said the work changed, which is a total falsehood. You know, like Round Point Consulting dealt with a number of tasks, which were the desk audits of new registrants, the ensuring existing registrants had maintained IBD eligibility, pre-award audits on set-aside contracts, random audits designated by the senior program manager, and large set-aside post-awards audits when they were 70% completed.
In particular, as part of that auditing process, you were looking at indigeneity, whether these companies were actually Indigenous. And the department at some point decided they did not want you looking at indigeneity. Now, a key issue here is misrepresentation of Indigenous identity fraud by companies that are getting government contracts. And they made a policy change to prevent external auditors from looking precisely at whether Indigenous identity fraud is happening. Why do you think they made that change?
I think there was pressure from certain Indigenous groups. And that was one of the things. They were always petitioning the department for, I think what was mentioned in yesterday's meeting that I watched, is that some of these groups want to set up their own directories and have the government access those.
Right. But I suppose having the communities themselves do the work is a different issue. The problem is now nobody's looking at it, right? The government, it seems, exploited this desire to have the Indigenous communities themselves do this work by essentially creating a vacuum in which right now nobody's looking at indigeneity.
Nobody's looking at them right now.
Right.
Not externally, you know.
Right. Okay.
And if you don't do an external independent auditor, you have you leave yourself open to bias.
Yeah, totally. So just in the time I have left, Chair, I want to seek the agreement of the committee, and I think it's been distributed. I asked it to be distributed in advance for the following proposal, that the committee invite the following witnesses to appear in relation to potential abuse of Indigenous procurement rules involving Canadian Healthcare Agency. Canadian Healthcare Agency, Sharon Umana, Jessica Salton, and Pearl Chilton. Further, that the committee authorize the chair to summon witnesses who do not agree to appear. So I hope that's been distributed. I'm just seeking the agreement of the committee.
Can I add, like Melanie Reid, who was in charge at that time, the senior program manager, she should maybe be on your list.
Okay, I that's what I meant to say, Chair, as well. In fact, I just misread my own notes here. Yeah. So as I was saying, Canadian Healthcare Agency, Sharon Umana, Jessica Salton, Melanie Reid, and Pearl Chilton. If Melanie Reid's not on the distributed email, I'm sure it's the clerk's fault, not mine. Just joking. A great addition, Mr. Hartle.
Are we fine with the?
We just got it. I haven't even looked at it yet. You say it was previously distributed.
It just came out now.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So no.
Okay. Well,
I haven't even got it on my P9 yet.
Well, it hasn't gone out yet, but do you wish to we can start a speaking list?
okay. Well, let's make it a notice of motion then, Chair, and maybe we'll be able to come back to it.
Maybe after
later.
The motion is fair.
Where we've got to get to the bottom of this issue with Canadian Healthcare Agency clearly, and there may be responses from the various people Mr. Hartle has named, and I would certainly like to hear from them.
Great.
But as I read it, which
Perfect.
is including
Yeah.
Melanie Reid. Thanks.
Perfect. We'll make sure that's updated, and we will come back to it after everyone's had a chance to look at it. Mr. Sousa, finish us off, please. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being with us today. So I'm just trying to understand the circumstances that's before us. You've identified through your many audits that you've done in the past as a subcontract for Altus and then as a subcontract for Round Point.
Subcontractor to Altus and employee for Round
All right,
Point.
so you're an employee of Round Point,
Employee.
which then that contract was terminated over time
Yes.
and wasn't renewed.
It was terminated for convenience.
Fair enough. But the contract came up for renewal and it wasn't renewed?
No, it was terminated. It was terminated before the contract ended.
Okay. And in that process of audits that you've made, you said you found about maybe 8 to 10% noncompliance of all those audits that you put forward, right?
Don't hold me to that, but I think it's about that amount.
Fair enough. And then when you've done the audit, it was identified that those non-compliant, and it's very clear on the website as to what you have to do to be compliant.
Yes.
And one of the ways that's been used to encourage Indigenous companies to succeed and get into the system and to take advantage of the opportunities that are available to them is through joint partnership, right? Because they, as sole providers, they don't have the wherewithal, possibly at the time. That's why we're nurturing them to be better. And the case here was there was a non-Indigenous company offering services and using an Indigenous partner to provide for greater opportunity. And that partner then didn't fulfill its requirements, and as you've pointed out, there was questionable activities as a result. And so corrective action was taken, and that was suspended, and that contract didn't proceed. Subsequently, the government has taken additional steps to try to provide for compliance and audit and oversight and integrity into the system. The definition of Indigenous or the ingenuity is something that's been also relevant in these discussions as to who should be the one determining that. And you're not the one determining ingenuity.
In my audits, I determined that.
So you are the one who's deciding on behalf of the Indigenous communities, those who are in debate at times as to who's Indigenous and who isn't. They're relying on you to say, yes, you are or you are not Indigenous?
It's not relying on me. There's a published criteria list. that you follow. I'm an auditor. I just make sure that if the criteria says that you're Indigenous, you know, I gather the evidence and I state there is ingenuity.
Right, and some of those very communities are saying that shouldn't be up to the government to decide.
Well,
I'm just referencing what has happened in these testimonies.
No, I understand that, but let me tell you that part of the process is we interacted with all these various groups, eh? Like if we wanted to find out if somebody was a Nunavut company, we phoned the registrar, or wrote to the registrar and asked them if this person's on the list. If this person's on the list, they're Indigenous. Okay, so and in the same thing, there's various self-government entities that maintain their own lists, and we just, as auditors, we would contact that group and ask them if this person is on their list as a member.
Fair enough. So I'm not questioning the actual audit of that nursing home. I'm trying to look at what's happening beyond that. Okay, we get what happened and it was identified and it's being dealt with. But now beyond that is a greater issue. And the Integrity Commission that's been established, the steps that are being put forward, is to try to provide integrity and transparency in the system, while at the same time nurturing the Indigenous engagement for their success.
So what I'm pointing out, those things are already being done. Okay, you know that like the criteria is published by the department, and where you have to follow the criteria. If you fall in one of these 6 categories, you're Indigenous. If you don't fall in any of those 6 categories, you're not Indigenous. But as auditors, we also make sure that we've done all the background. Like I've read all the Supreme Court cases.
I'm not getting. That's not my point. My point is, we are all entitled to. We required to that audit, to that job, and I'm trying to understand. So, what should we do better? I mean, we look at the fraud. We have to make sure that doesn't continue. We're taking these extra steps to try to prevent them. So, what are you suggesting should be done?
I just suggest you have your departments follow the practice. You know, I mean, if you take away all the ability to audit, you can do whatever you like. You know,
no, we're augmenting the audits. We're actually creating greater restraints.
Well,
That's it.
Well, I don't see it in this particular case. I mean, you've removed all the external audits.
Okay, that is our time, gentlemen. Mr. Hurdle, thanks for joining us. You did mention again some reports that I think you submitted to a different committee. If you're able to deliver them to the clerk now or electronically, that'd be wonderful.